Hello, everybody, and welcome to Church at Home with Rachel for Monday, the 15th of April. It is a brand new week. I am here, but only here for a couple days this week because on Thursday I get to drive to I'm in Brandon. I get to drive to Wainwright and start moving my husband to our new home here where all of our stuff will be, and we'll have pictures on the walls, and I will have more than 4 plates and bowls to work with, and all of his stuff will be in his drawers, and it'll be great because we will be in our forever till retirement home. And in this diocese, I get to work till 70 years plus 9 months. So on my birthday, when I'm 70, I have 9 months to retire. So I've got I'm only 52. I got a good long time to be here. So I'm excited about being in my permanent home, which I've never really had before. So it's exciting. Today, I'd like to talk about the eclipse from last Monday. So I've had a week to process it and to get back from Niagara Falls because I was one of those lucky people who was able to actually be right in the path. We made a point. Our House of Bishops meeting for National House of Bishops is always in Niagara Falls, so that was just a coincidence, and it was a coincidence that we happened to gather that day. But we got there good and early because we were worried about the million people, which there weren't. It was a very cloudy day, and which made it not as spectacular as it could be, but we still experienced it in its fullness. So we got some pictures. There were times when the clouds would part and you can actually see the eclipse without having to use the glasses. And somebody provided a bunch of us with glasses so we could see what we could see. But the effects of the eclipse, even though we couldn't see the eclipse perfectly because it wasn't sunny out, it wasn't a clear sky, the effects of the eclipse were absolutely powerful as the sky darkened and the temperature dropped significantly. And the birds, right before the full eclipse happened, the seagulls and the birds were absolutely wild, diving around and making noise. And then all of a sudden, silence. And then the darkness. It's so dark that all the streetlights came on, and it was eerie. I think probably I'll be continuing to process that eclipse for a long time. And someday I will probably share with you some thoughts and some reflections on the beauty and the power of that, and the nature that God created that these things can happen. And it even got me thinking about this is how things happen. Somebody asked the question about there's the fact that people have talked about, was there a solar eclipse the day that we talk about Good Friday, when the sun disappeared, when Jesus died on the cross and night overtook the day? It's quite possible. That could be a theory that I'm sure many people have looked into it, but that's quite possible that that's what happened, because it is out of these elements of truth, elements that have things that happen, that we create our stories. And so that's a question I'm pondering in my head. And there's lots of beautiful things about the eclipse that I'm pondering in my head as well. But something else that I've been thinking about is the opposite of that. I'm living in a world now where I am faced with the truth that there are people who are indigenous peoples in my diocese who are that much closer to Creator, who have a less of a, put it this way. When I was growing up, my grandfather used to tell us, well, that's your second cousin once removed, or that's your third cousin twice removed, and things like that. And no matter how hard he tried to explain to us, what does this once removed thing mean, we would just be confused, and we just called them our cousin. It didn't matter. They were our cousin. I am reminded about that by my indigenous siblings here in this diocese, because there is, I get a sense that there are times when my relationship with Creator, my relationship with the created, is something like that once removed or twice removed. That I'm meeting people, these people who have lived on the land, who have lived in a world where their culture was stolen from them, beaten in some cases from them, where they have lived through the reality that they were told that they weren't to have that culture, that it was wrong. And for some of them, they still struggle with it. They struggle with desiring to have that culture because they were taught so well taught that that was a culture they should be leaving behind. And there are those who have embraced it wholeheartedly and are trying to teach others how to reclaim their culture. that to make sure that they're no longer once or twice or three times removed from who God created them to be. And there's a whole element of recognition of the spiritual and the relationship of the created with the creator, not just people, but animals and nature, that all of these things are one, they're in harmony with one another, intentionally by God. So things like an eclipse is not something unusual or like, oh, it's part of the beauty of creator's creation. And we need to learn from these things. And I'm also learning that I am, because of my own upbringing and my own culture, and there's nothing wrong with either of those things, but my experiences, which have provided me wonderful experience in this world, these areas of my of life, have not allowed me to have other experiences that other peoples have had, whether it's our indigenous siblings or it's people from Europe or Asia or other places in the world where they understand the world and they understand their own culture and that influence that they had has on them in a completely different way. And in some ways, I'm jealous. I'm not upset about it because I am who I am and I'm glad of who I am. But there are some things I'm learning that I need to learn about because our cultures are intertwined. As siblings in God's creation, we are intertwined and I need to learn from them just as maybe they need to learn from me in a gentle way, not by force, but by choice. Again, topic for another day. But one of the things I am learning is that there is, and I'm only just beginning to learn. It's not even just the tip of the iceberg. This is me looking at the iceberg that sunk the Titanic from back on England's shores. Like, I'm not even, I'm only mildly aware that it's out there, but I am aware that it's coming and it's coming fast. And there's so much below the surface that I need to learn. And that is a reality that a lot of people like me, who look like me, who worship like me, don't like to admit. And that is the reality that evil exists. That there are those principalities and powers that go against God's creation, that go against the harmony and the joy and the peace that God intends, that Jesus brings. And I was having a conversation with a few different bishops, and we were talking about that. We got talking about blessings, like house blessings and exorcisms and things like that, or conversations I never thought I'd have. And it was interesting and powerful. But one of the things that came up was, have we ever experienced evil? Have we ever experienced those moments when we know we are in the presence of the unholy? And I have a couple of times. And it's powerful and it can be dangerous. It can also be a reminder that we are called to call upon the holiest of the holy. That in those moments of unholy, we have the greatest antidote, Jesus Christ. And I have been able to that's how I've dealt with the unholy, is by reaching out and calling upon, invoking the name of the holiest of holies. But I was reminded that our indigenous siblings, sometimes, not all the time, but in some cultures, and particularly the cultures I will be working with, there is an awareness and a respect. Respect not in that they are, hold it in good esteem, but a respect of knowing those things that are dangerous. I have respect for a busy road that I'm not going to walk out right into the middle of the traffic. I have respect for a railroad track that I'm going to look both ways before I cross. That kind of respect. That you give it due attention, to be careful, to be aware of the dangers. And when and it could be that that the eclipse caused the circumstances that allowed these conversations to happen. Or maybe they were just coincidentally going to happen anyway, because the conversations happened after the eclipse. But I've been thinking a lot about that eclipse and what happened when the sun was completely blocked out by the moon. It wasn't completely instantaneous because it took about 4 minutes. We watched it, it got darker and darker. But then all of a sudden the birds stopped making any sounds. And before people had started oohing and awing, there was an incredible sense that something was wrong. Something was uncomfortable. It was really cold. It was a chilly day for me anyway, and I didn't have a coat on, just my sweatshirt. when we were in Niagara Falls watching for the eclipse. But the temperature dropped so much that I was really, really cold. That cold you get when you are told someone you love has just died. That cold you get when you're not feeling well and the life just falls down around your feet and you don't know how to pick yourself up. You're like that deep bone drenching cold. That's how I felt. And in the couple of minutes when we were in that darkness and we could feel the wind, but we couldn't hear the birds. There were no animals. There was silence. It felt heavy. It felt despairing. At the same time, it felt incredible and miraculous, and knowing that the sun was going to remain there and the moon would pass by and everything would be as it was again. But in that couple of moments, I had a sense like I've had before when evil has descended. It helped to know that indeed the moon would continue its path, or the sun, however the eclipse works, that we would again see light. And it helped when people pointed out that there was a 360-degree sunset. That when I turned in a circle and looked around, just above the horizon, there was a sunset 360 degrees. And it reminded me that no matter how bad things get, no matter how much evil might be present in a situation in God's creation, God's sun is always there. We might have trouble seeing him. We might have trouble reaching him, but he never leaves us. He is always there. And there are times in our lives when we need to face the evil, when we need to be there, standing there, acknowledging the coldness, acknowledging the darkness, knowing that as much as Jesus might have the power to swoop in and save the day, that's not what life is about. Good Friday, Jesus had the power to get off that cross. But he needed us. We needed him to allow us to descend with him into the darkness, just for a little while, that we might appreciate the light, that we might understand the sacrifice, that we might understand what it was that we did not have to deal with because of what he did. I don't know. Thoughts for another day. But in the darkness, in the cold, in that strange sense of being during the eclipse, I had a real sense that I have to be aware and respectful of those dark powers and principalities that will surround me. Because the truth is that when you're doing well, when you are working toward what God wants you to work toward, when you are fighting the good fight and you are hammering it home, you're hitting home runs, you're doing the best you can, that's when the dark powers and principalities are most apt to come at you. Because they don't want you to win. They don't want you to hit a home run. They don't want you to be able to celebrate the love of God. That is contrary to what they want. And that makes you the most targetable target, not a word, but the most appealing target for them, because you are doing what God wants you to do. But the good news is that eclipse of darkness, that sense of being attacked by those dark powers and principalities will not last. And even while you're in the midst of it, and you're feeling the cold and the frustration and even the despair of this moment, lower your eyes. Instead of looking up toward the sun, which seems to be eclipsed, instead of looking up toward where you believe God is, and right now you cannot see for the darkness, lower your eyes in prayer and notice the 360-degree sunset. Notice the light of Christ reaching out to you in spite of that darkness. And remember that is not a permanent sunset, because the sunrise is coming. The sun will always and every time defeat the dark powers and principalities. The Prince of Light will win every time. I encourage you to think, when you feel that eclipse of your soul, Look for the sunsets. Look around you for those glimmers of light, which are there. And you know what? It may simply be me or Ed Trevors or a friend at the end of a phone or an email or your neighbor down the street or a coworker. But reach out to them, because looking to them, they may indeed be the way that the sun is shining on you, reminding you that you are not alone and that you have been given the strength to endure this eclipse of your heart. The light will come again. I promise you that. Don't despair that you won't ever see it again, but trust that if you're in the middle of that despair and that darkness, it is because the dark powers and principalities are recognizing that the good powers and principalities are doing something beautiful and wonderful in your life, and they can't stand it. They're jealous. Don't let them win. Allow yourself to see that sunset in every direction you look. Have a great day. God bless you. I will see you again tomorrow for Church at Home with Rachel. And I'll be coming from Niagara Falls, I hope. God bless.